You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
I'm here today with Dave Hills. His most recent adventure is running a company called Advanced Contextual. But Dave and I have known each other for longer than we care to admit. I think he was running sales for About.com and then was at 24/7, which is a competitor of Did It's at the time. And then he ran LookSmart for a while. And the common theme there has sort of been content and search or highly targeted search traffic. And interestingly, it's come full circle with the Advanced Contextual, which sort of goes back to the early days of AdSense to some extent, because AdSense, one of Google's early products outside of search, was all about context.
Right.
And context is really hot again. So I'd love to hear how you got involved in Advanced Contextual and what the backstory is.
Well, so Kevin, it's great to be reconnected with you again, and it's good to know somebody else who's been in the industry as long as I have, who's still in the industry. Yeah, it's interesting. You know, you bring up About.com and AdSense. If you remember at About.com, we had this product called Sprinks that we ultimately sold to Google, which became one of the three legs, I think, to the AdSense stool. And that product was all about matching ads to content pages on About.com, right? So this has been obviously a passion of mine for an awful long time. And Advanced Contextual represented what I thought would be a unique opportunity to work in the programmatic space, right? So when we started Advanced Contextual at the beginning of 2018, we did it based on watching GDPR come across the pond from Europe, right? And it became apparent to us that same sort of constriction of third-party data was going to occur here, right? And it also became apparent to us that nobody in the industry had paid much attention to context for an awful long time, which was fine, right? We all got into whatever habits we got into with cookie and the related third-party data. We view the two things as separate. The delivery vehicle going away is one thing. The third-party data that powered the delivery vehicle, we think, is something else. But anyway, you know, we started with the goal of creating a platform that would be privacy compliant at the end of the day, right? Provide a contextual signal that was robust and scale enough that you could actually replace much of what you do with the third-party data that sits in the cookie using contextual, right? We caught a break in that the entire industry's, future kind of unfolded when you were writing code into the platform. So if you think about the time period that we built it during 18, 19, and 20, right? Those were all incredibly good years to be building a platform like this. And as a result, and I'm sure we'll talk about this during our podcast, it caused us to make decisions about how we approach different problems, because at the nut of it, it'll be interesting to see if you agree with this or not, Kevin. At the nut of it, the thing that you have to do with contextual is make sure that it scales and preserves performance and precision. That's always been the difficulty with keyword-based only contextual at the domain level, right? It just doesn't stay relevant for all that long. Anyway, long story short, we're here, 3 years and some months later. I've got just an incredible team around me, people I've worked with for an awful long time on different versions of this problem. And we have built what we believe is the better mousetrap.
That's great. That's great. I mean, yeah, certainly with context, I think part of the challenge is that, you can grade context at so many different levels, right? Obviously, at the domain level, it's pretty blunt. At the category level, that fits potentially within the IAB taxonomy, but I'm not sure it's that useful to most marketers. And then obviously at the page level, it starts to get more useful. And then for longer form content, there's the potential possibility to even grade within the page, right?
Right.
Based on different paragraphs of content within the page. So in order to reach scale, you have to find that perfect balance from just a grading perspective, but you also have to make sure that you're grading pages that actually get traffic. Because grading a page that gets no traffic is, like the tree falling in the forest. Right?
That's right. That's right.
You don't want to, but like there's, spending compute time on grading a page that's not going to get enough traffic. You don't get scaled either there. So, I'm curious how you approach that from the perspective of an engineering perspective to sort of find those diamonds.
Yeah, that's actually a great framing of what it was that we had to solve, right? So you have a series of concepts in there. Let me unpack them a little bit from our perspective. So the first thing you have to do in order to have a credible contextual engine at scale is to be able to draw a circle around the appropriate content that you're looking to target, right? And ultimately, while everything you do ultimately targets some set of keywords, you have to make sure those keywords are in the right place, right? We use topics as our first, line of offense into understanding what content is. Let me give you a practical example. About 5 or 6 weeks ago, one of the people in the company was looking at a set of reports. We have all sorts of diagnostics about the millions of impressions that we listen to a second. And this person's observation was that there was an explosion of really good travel keywords and content, right? So as you know, any keyword system will see those keywords, start bidding on them through whatever platform they use to bid on them, and suck up as many of them as possible. One of the things our platform does when it sees a discontinuous jump like that is it takes a pause. And it says, well, where are these keywords occurring, right? And this is where topics become important. This explosion of travel keywords, all highly relevant commercial terms, were in Afghanistan evacuation content. So they were exactly the right keywords in precisely the wrong place. And in fact, last week we put out a quick post on brand suitability and said, look, that is the definition of brand suitability. But first we start with a topic, right? Because then everything is in context of that topic. Is Malibu an animal, a beach, or an automobile, right? You and I could go on all day long about the ambiguity of keyword search. We start with topics. Then to your second point that you made, we focus our topic engine on article and video level pages, not home and section fronts, right? In fact, early on, we built a home and section front filter. And we did that based on observing the legacy engines, which we consider to be Oracle, ComScore, Simasio, great companies, right? But first generation stuff when it comes to context. We were looking at returns that you get out of one of those engines, and an awful lot of them have to do with home and channel fronts. And home and channel fronts are great from a reach perspective, but they're not great from a targeting perspective, right? Something might be, a section front might be relevant for half hour of a news cycle when there's a link up there that people click on that takes them to an article about travel, and you're a travel advertiser, right? But other than that, recording that page and recording those people doesn't make any sense. So it's topics at the article and video page level. And then we decided that we needed to write down a lot about the pages that we encountered. So our company is built on top of a custom search engine that we built ourselves. And it has an index in it of about 4.5 billion pages that goes back in time 18 months, all the way to the impression level. So we know an awful lot about article and video level pages in our instance in North America. So topics at the article and video page level, write down and keep a copy of every page that you encounter is really the only way that we believe that you can scale context and have it preserve its precision and performance.
What kind of ad formats do you think lend themselves, because obviously using the context as your targeting vehicle, right? And most people think about context who've been around a long time, think about context as if it was AdSense, right? And AdSense obviously was IB banner ads, right?
Yeah.
IB dimension banner ads. But obviously, now that you've got this context signal, you can run any ad against it you want.
Sure.
You could run video, you could run potentially even audio, I guess, in some cases, but or rich media or banners. And where's the interest lying primarily, or is it really across the board?
I think it's got to be across the board, right? So context has always had a reasonably low attach rate, if for no other reason than the cookie was just so easy to buy, right? It came with the delivery vehicle and all the data included, right? So if you want context to really scale, it's got to be ubiquitous, right? And it's got to be easy to access. We ultimately believe that for context to actually have the ability to replace the third-party data against any ID set, it has to be available in both in private exchanges as well as the open exchange. It's not available in the open exchange today. We think it could be, right? Because the IAB spec allows pages to be recognized in the buying workflow. But there are some things that need to be done with context in order to give it competitive distribution, I guess is probably the concept that I would probably rest on.
Right. Now, some keywords and context signals are strong and fleeting, meaning that the person's probably not in market and won't respond to messaging down the road. And in some cases, that context may actually replace a behavioral signal. Do you see the publishers, given that they've got first-party data, cookies, and potentially first-party registration data, that they become then the conduit to extend the life of the contextual signal? Or do you feel like the contextual signal really has its primary value, in real time? In other words, it's a travel page about cruise vacations, and I'm a cruise advertiser, and that even if the publisher could act as a conduit to sort of allow your platform to grab that person when they went into the real estate section, that shouldn't be done? Or do you feel like there's an opportunity there?
Yeah, it's a really interesting concept that you bring up. So there's a concept of workflow parity that I think we have to focus on now, right? And you brought up the two main use cases. In some instances, publishers will have private deals with brands, right? You can, Wall Street Journal and Dell or something like that, right? Food and wine and whatever wine vineyard out of California, right? There are those type of connections. And then there are the ones that are more programmatic, right? Where you're not going to want to put all of the inventory aside. So publishers, I think, have an awful large hand in this. What publishers, I think, have the hugest hand in is figuring out how to deliver this like the third-party companies delivered cookie and third-party data buys, right? If you think about it, Kevin, you'll understand this probably better than a lot of your audience will, but we'll go into the Wayback Machine. There's a point in time in the development of the cookie where the industry almost vended out both prospecting and retention, right? A brand could go buy a bunch of DLX segments, start to run those DLX segments. People hit their site. They hand the people that hit their site over to Criteo, and poof, they've got prospecting and they've got retention all in one place, right? So that gets replaced in the go forward industry. I think brands and publishers will take their first party inventory, their first party users data, and I think that they'll be able to use it for the other's benefit, right? So for instance, we have clients already today on the demand side who are leveraging their first party data in the furtherance of objectives like LTV, right? And through that LTV process, there's predictive modeling that can be done on contextual, though that's another question. And they have a certain reach because they have a certain number of IDs that have signed up for this particular service or product that they have. But it's not endless, right? The publishers, on the other hand, have first-party data. They don't understand a lot about the first-party data, right? They have an email address, maybe their Google Analytics on their sites is set up such that they can see what sections the person goes to, right? But again, it's kind of like the brand. They only know what they know about the person based on the relationship they have with them. Context can fill a hell of a bridge there, right? On the brand side, it can tell the brand, that their LTV segments is the quintiles or quartiles or something like that. Quartile 2 and quartile 3 tend to read this set of topics, and quartile 3 that set of topics. Publishers have the same capability. The publishers can learn more about their first-party data by combining contextual signals for what those people read when they're not on that publisher's site. Now, all of a sudden, there's a richer understanding of that person. More instructions can be sent through on the bid request. The buyer on the receiving end can say, oh, yes, I understand that impression now, and that's certainly an impression that I want. And I think that's where the publishers control lies, right? They didn't know the value. I actually had a very large publisher tell me a number of months ago that they didn't really understand the value of their inventory for much of the last 15 years because the cookie buyers told them what it was worth. Now the publishers are in a position, and I think it's an enviable one having been a publisher, where they actually can and have to learn more about their inventory.
That's a great point. I think there are many publishers who might hear this who should really go back and rethink their data strategy as a result, because they do have the relationship with the reader/viewer, and the more data they can append onto that data, the more data they can append onto that user ID, the more valuable that user ID becomes to them as the publisher.
That's right, and the industry's changing now, right? 50% of the impressions that we listen to on a 24-hour basis now come through with no ID attached to it, right? So the brand is losing traction with those third-party IDs already, and the publisher can certainly, swoop in and fill at least part of that demand. I think you're going to see very different relationships between publishers and brands going forward. I mean, we've always said that, and the relationships always adjust, but this should be reasonably permanent because they both have first-party audiences.
So the question I have around that is when you start mixing two first-party audiences together in Venn diagrams or the sort of equivalents of those, you lose scale pretty quickly, right? And so it would seem that only the very largest publishers in conjunction with the very largest brands will really see the true benefit of that data commingling or that Venn diagram overlap, where they'll be able to sort of say, each bring their own data to the party, right? And then as a result of those two data sets being mashed together, that just has a 1 + 1 = 3 relationship. But it's going to be sort of a small set of the overall ecosystem that will each be able to bring a big enough data set to the party that when you look at the mashup, that the mashup's big enough to make it worth the trouble.
So I agree with you on an individual brand and publisher basis, without a doubt, right? Brands and publishers are going to have to be cautious about how much time they spend with each other based on how much scale they have in a particular vertical or how much need they have for a particular audience, right? But I think more generally, context, and it's not just page level context. Context has a capital C to it, right? Your location is a context of your persona, right? What you read is a context of your persona. There are other signals of context, and I think those signals can be put together in such a way that there becomes some very interesting predictive modeling capabilities, which we're actually working on right now. Right. And these predictive modeling capabilities are different than the ones that we might have experienced with, Oracle's DLX for two reasons. They're transparent, right? And they're owned by either the brand, the publisher, or them together in concert with each other, right? That didn't happen before. It was all owned by DLX. So we actually, part of what we built in building our engine, remembering back to the concept of it's got to perform and stay precise as it scales, is some pretty interesting audience extension capabilities, which are in use today, that use the consumption of related topics amongst cohorts to better understand where to go prospect for a certain type of customer. And we're finding that it's effective. It works, right? You have to be able to really understand the relationship within a base of people as to how their content consumption exists in what we consider to be a series of concentric circles as opposed to a path. But the data exists that you can go ahead and do that analytics. That's one of the things that we focused on in launching our platform this year when we had the final product on, was its audience extension capabilities. And it works incredibly well. So that means that even the mid-tail publishers probably have skin in the game going forward because it gets swept up into those predictive models. And increasingly, as we move through this period of change in the industry, we increasingly view it as the open web against the walled gardens. And if the open web is able to, in a transparent way, leverage brand and their first party data toward a particular shared goal of performance on a campaign, and do that in a really transparent way, brands and agencies will feel confident in starting to move dollars away from the walled gardens, because you and I both know what they're going to do. They're going to do as little as possible and tell you and show you as little of as they have to, right? So there's actually a huge opportunity that didn't exist during the reign of, the cookie and related third-party data.
Great. A question popped into my mind about different content types. So obviously, for those of us who've been in the digital marketing world for a long time, we primarily think of context as it relates to the written word, right? But now with the explosion of video and the explosion of audio, we're doing video and audio live right now.
Sure.
There will come an opportunity to, through transcription and, to determine context of podcasts or context
Yep.
of video news shows or context of other forms of content, and apply the same, rigor in targeting to video and audio. Do you see that as a big opportunity?
Absolutely. We've actually been listening to video and audio for quite some time now. Have a lot of respect for the image recognition companies that are out there. That's just a hell of a lot of great science that they put together. In our instance, we focus on available metadata. So when we built the engine, we really focused on building a flexible reader, a reader that can include parts of a page, exclude parts of a page. And as you just observed, in video and audio are generally, either a summary of what the show is about or a transcription. And as long as we have metadata content like that to grab onto, we can very dependably tell what a piece of audio or a piece of video is about, right? Which kind of gets back to your question before about what ad formats work. It's really about the medium, I think, that you're trying to address. And context has to power all of those different ad forms. But we are very effectively listening to video content today without being able to recognize anything in the image, and we do it very, very with high precision.
That's great. I think that there are a lot of folks who may not be thinking about context because they're thinking about old school context, right? And they're thinking, well, my ad format that I'm putting all my energy behind, isn't just an animated GIF or an HTML5 banner. It's
right.
Video, and so they may be missing opportunities to grab onto the contextual signal within to have the ad delivered in the same native format that
right.
the content is.
Yeah.
So I think that's a huge opportunity that really isn't talked about that much within the ecosystem yet.
Right. No, I think the deployment of the contextual signal is going to take a while to normalize to the, whatever the 80-20 of use cases winds up being, right? So contextual right now is in this tremendous period of attach rate growth. And that's going to continue through the rest of this year. And I believe all the way through the end of next year. Once that attach rate hits that, I don't know what the mark is, 65, 70% or something like that, then I think you'll start to understand better what the normalized use cases will be, and how matching is going to wind up occurring from an advertising perspective. It's interesting when we look at we've had explosive growth in our customer base over the last 90 days, right? And I think everybody in the contextual space would likely say pretty much the same thing. And as we start to step away from that first spurt of growth, and we take a look at the brands and the type of partner companies who use our signal to better inform what it is that they sell. When we take a look at those companies from an attribute perspective, they all tend to be higher considered purchase: automotive, insurance, finance, B2B routers and things like that. And those, I believe, pharma, and those, I believe, are the first categories that are feeling the initial pinch of third-party data not being available to them in the quantity and quality that it was before. But we think probably, the beginning to the middle of next year, even companies like consumer packaged good companies that don't have a robust understanding of their customer are going to need to start to try, their own version of what contextual marketing winds up being. And we're very much looking forward to, starting to work with those categories. Our big categories right now are auto, financial services, pharmaceutical. On the partner side, most of our partners are B2B partners, right? And if you think about those categories generally, those are people that are really thirsty for knowledge about who it is that they're addressing, right? They either have laws that they have to adhere to, or they lead targets that they have to adhere to. And they tend to be the early adopters. And we're starting to see a lot of action from them over the past. I mean, it's so hard right now because of the collapsed time frame that we're in this year. Over the past 30 to 45 days, we've had more broad-based consumer products come forward and say, hey, we need to learn more about context. We want to try it for this. We want to try it for that. So I think there'll be categories that will have what their ultimate contextual deployment is figured out sooner than other categories. And I think that'll probably mean there are some platforms that are further along the learning curve than other platforms by dint of that.
Cool. It just occurred to me that for many publishers, they're more used to context being used as a weapon against them than as a tool for them, particularly with regards to the areas of brand safety, right? Mm-hmm. So, keyword taxonomies and keywords were often used as an excuse to not serve the ad, even though the advertiser won that bid. Then you end up with somebody as an intermediary raising their hand and saying, oh no, there's a bad keyword on this page. Is there a way for the publishers to actually end up using context as a way to sort of rescue that inventory that would otherwise have been brand unsafe?
Yeah, I think so. So there's a couple of points in there, right? So first of all, topics are the thing that squares that circle, right? If you're really worried about brand safety past things like hate porn and stuff like that, then a topic should make you feel very confident that if you understand the environment the keywords are in, then the keywords are good, or you can ignore them. Over the past couple of weeks, we've had both supply side and demand side companies come to us with ideas of problems that they believe they want to solve. And the undercurrent to them, Kevin, has been that the brand safety tools like IAS and Double Verify that have been available to date, in their minds, don't seem to have the same potency in the go forward world as they did in the prior world that was based on cookies. I can't really tell you why that is. We haven't dug in deep enough, but the types of questions that we got literally within days of each other from both supply and demand companies certainly indicated a lack of satisfaction on front with the brand safety tools that are available. And they are sort of blunt instruments, right? I think IAS and Double Verify do a great job of hygiene against really, really easy to understand fraud and different IVT problems. God bless them for that, right? Without that, we would have been in much, much worse shape. But in a world where context is more nuanced, and you can't just say these keywords are good or bad, because if they're the right keywords in the wrong place, they're no good. So there's got to be some sort of instruments that are more subtle than the mallet of a couple of keywords at the top of a domain. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We all saw that last year with COVID, right? When IAS and Double Verify put COVID at the top of the stream, all of a sudden, all that content went without ads for a couple of weeks until they sorted through that.
Yeah.
So there does seem to be a general dissatisfaction with the brand safety tools. Context isn't a Swiss Army knife, but understanding the words on a page does give you a lot of intelligence about what that page is about.
Right. So what's next in the product roadmap for you guys that you're able to share? Obviously, I'm not looking for you to share anything that isn't
we're a pretty open book. If you read our content, we tell you pretty much what's on our mind. Our platform is transparent and our company is transparent. So a few weeks ago, based on use case demand, we released the ability to begin with an audience instead of a set of pages or a set of keywords or other artifacts that you can jam into our system. So being able to flesh out identity resolution after identity's been managed, and that's where we pick it up. We're not in the ID management business. We don't have a proprietary ID. We didn't subscribe to a proprietary ID. We listen to the bid stream, so we see all IDs. But the I just forgot where I was going, Kevin. Sorry about that. I'll pick it up.
That's quite right. I guess we were talking about the future, right? What you've got cooking.
Yeah. So we're very much focused on a greater identity resolution at the user level. And we've had an awful lot of demand for that, right? There are the brands that want to optimize for LTV. They certainly need to know more about their users, right? There are the publishers that we spoke about who know that, I go to a particular newspaper and read the sports and the business section. What else do I read, right? So we think that the analytic capabilities of context are just getting touched right now, and those will continue to expand.
There's been, some fairly significant M&A at the publisher holding level, recently. The most recent one, obviously, being Meredith. Do you feel like one of the drivers there is the sort of identity resolution that essentially placing themselves as a first party data holder there, and that with the increased scale that's driving, or do you think there are other factors driving that?
Well, God knows why companies wind up merging, and Meredith and Dotdash. I mean, I could go back to about.com and Prime Media, right, where there were all sorts of different reasons. I'm sure one of them has to be scale of first party data. Has to be, right? That's part of the asset that's implicit in all media companies now, is a higher value of first party data, just because it's going to get used on a going forward basis, right? It wasn't when the cookie was the predominant delivery vehicle. So I would imagine M&A activity in the publishing arena would continue to increase. And I would imagine you'd also see companies that are text heavy and companies that are video heavy looking at combining with each other. So there's a balance of different types.
Great. A final question for those folks out there on the marketer side who are completely bought into this context and the power that lives within context. They've got a half a dozen providers that they can partner with. Do you recommend that they partner with all of them, or do you feel like that in the end there'll be sort of a winner take all, or sort of one platform will rise to the surface? Hopefully it'll be you, but if it's not you, maybe it'll be one of the others. But do you feel like they should spread the love, right? Should they be running against the different? Each of you sort of are analyzing the signals a little bit differently. So should they really be testing you against each other?
Yeah, I think they should. I think there's a lot of good that comes from that rigor of testing. We've been involved in a lot of bake-offs. We win, more than our fair share because we were thoughtful about building the engine. So it's easy, it's easy for me to say that. Ultimately, our vision for this company is that we are the infrastructure that powers all of context going forward, right? We already leverage other forms of NLP than our own. We already listen to different event streams other than our own. We do that for hire for companies. And the reason that we do that is it's senseless for somebody to go out and build what we build if that kind of event stream is only one part of what they do, right? So I think there are really a couple of concepts in your question that's a very, very good one. One is that there isn't going to be a one-size-fits-all form of event stream. Certainly, each company is going to have their own individual event stream. And I don't think that there's going to be one form of NLP or categorization that wins out. Like I said, today already, we're listening on behalf of B2B marketing companies, right? At what one would consider marketing tech companies and stuff like that. So I think the infrastructure will be viewed separately than the ultimate artifact that winds up getting delivered. And we believe that we can be that infrastructure that powers both the open and the private web from a deal perspective between brands and publishers.
Yeah, that's interesting. Part of the reason I asked that is because as the RTB and PMP ecosystem moved to a first price bid from a second price bid, which it's still, I guess, somewhat in transition, but it's mostly moved to first price bid. You no longer had the concern that you would be bidding against yourself, right? And that was primarily when the cookie was this identifier. When you're going to do retargeting, you're like, well, last thing I want to do is raise my own price, so I have to pick a DSP to do my bidding in the ecosystem. Once it moved to a first party pricing, and it became clear that not every DSP got to listen to every bid, and that there were actually significant situations where, for whatever reason, a large percentage of impressions were not seen by a specific DSP, that it suddenly made sense to go meta, right? To actually sort of spread yourself around. And I'm sort of, I was sort of applying that same thinking to the contextual engines, because you guys may not hear every impression, right? Just as a result.
That's true. Yeah, absolutely.
The silly way in which the SSPs and exchanges work is that it's not really that everyone hears every impression, because it would take an enormous infrastructure to do that, right?
Right. And you don't need to listen to every impression, right? So I think there will be, I don't believe it's going to be like the brand safety layer that we have, that it's going to be dominated by a couple of companies. I actually think there are going to be a lot of entrants. I think there's going to be one company that winds up providing the rails for most of it. And I think that we have a better than even chance to be that company. And we're excited about that in the future.
Great. Well, I look forward to watching your continued evolution and journey into the wonderful world of context, which we both know pretty well already.
Yeah. It's great. It's a great time to have built this company. We're really excited about it. It's really good to reconnect with you today.
Likewise. We'll talk soon.
Yeah, thank you.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.